you. And do you have mics over here? Good, okay, because this room is problematic. You probably know that if you've been here before. Thank you all for coming. Many of you have been coming every week. This is terrific. Today we have, for It Matters, race and gender, which has been, both of those have been quite an issue this go-round. So I don't know if any of you heard Randall Kennedy yesterday. That was an interesting, some interesting viewpoints on the issue of race. So let's see, I want to mention a couple of things here that are new. One is the Election Central from the Associated Students. Anyone here from the Associated Students? Well, anyway, you have a big, huge poster here, and that will be a gathering at 5 p.m. on November 4th over in the Student Union. So you can all watch the election results together. It says free snacks, and it says you can have your picture taken with McCain and Obama. Rock the vote. So anyway, there'll be a lot of activity. Actually, tear yourself away from your lonesome television set. So announcing that. Now, also our library website, we have a lot of links on it if you're still looking for background information at this point, and you can find it in a lot of places, including on our library website. We have one more regular lecture, and that's next week on immigration. And then the week after that will be the debriefing after the election on Wednesday the 5th, right? And that one will be interesting. It always is, and this year may be more interesting than ever. So, okay, I think we want to get started here. We have Catherine Nelson from the Department of Political Science and Don Romesburg from Gender and Women's Studies. And they're going to divide up these themes a little bit. I'll let them explain to you how they're going to do that.
Who's going first?
So welcome.
I'm going first. I just got told I'm going first, so I'll go first. I want to move around a little bit just because I like moving around a little bit. I'm Catherine Nelson, as Mark told you. I'm a political scientist. I've been teaching at Sonoma State for, hello? Hi, JJ, how are you? Can you hear me now?
No, I can't hear you.
My name is Catherine Nelson. I'm a political science professor. I've been teaching at Sonoma State for, I'm not going to tell you how many years. I've been intrigued by this election as much as everybody else because of the historic nature of it. We have, for the first time, an African-American candidate, one of the two major parties, who is not only the candidate of a major party, but at this point anyway, poised to win. We have a woman on the Democratic side who came very close to taking the Democratic nomination. We now have a woman nominee as a Republican, or for the vice presidential position on the Republican ticket. And no matter what happens, this is an historic year. And if you have my kinds of interests, you're interested in the kinds of meanings, the kinds of symbolism, the kinds of social undercurrents that come to the fore when we have an election like this, when you have so many people that you are not used to looking at in positions of power, i.e. somebody that is other than a white male, okay? I am a political theorist, a political philosopher. Normally I talk about people like Plato and Aristotle and Marx. However, if you fast forward into the 21st century, there's a political theorist at Berkeley named Wendy Brown. You may or may not have heard of her. She doesn't like to call herself that, but she really is a postmodernist. And she talks about political theory as a meaning-making enterprise. It's a way of making sense of the world. And not just to describe the world, but to rearrange the world so that you can look at it in a different way. And in particular, what she looks for, and a lot of this contemporary trend in a lot of folks in this particular aspect of the discipline look for, are what we call discourses. And discourses are packages of knowledge, if you will, different types of knowledge that tell us how it is that our society should be arranged, what our role in that society should be, how we should act, and all of the things that go along with that. And what I'm doing here is looking for discourses about gender in political cartoons of Sarah Palin, of all things. Now, why did I choose Sarah Palin? Well, because I find her absolutely fascinating as a political figure, but also because I had my students read an article about political cartoons of Hillary Clinton back in it was published in 1999, and this woman named Charlotte Templin looked at a when she was First Lady to see how it was that the political media, in particular the cartoons, were portraying her as First Lady. And again, you look at her cartoons as what we call a site for the manifestation of a discourse. This is a place where you can look and see what it is that our society, as reflected through the lens of these cartoonists, think about women, or think what we should laugh about women, or what it's okay to satirize, all of those kinds of things. What Charlotte Templin found was that, as you might expect, Hillary was everything from a ball buster to a paradigm buster. She made Bill Clinton look like a woman. There were cartoons of him dressed in drag, women's drag, and the whole 9 yards. So she came up against the boundary of the heterosexual norm for women in this culture, the long-standing heterosexual norm of being a good wife and a mother first. If your man is in a position of power, you do everything you can to make sure that he is seen as a strong man in power, including making sure everybody knows he's heterosexual. Okay? So you're the nice wife, you dress well, you compliment him. So what I started looking at Sarah Palin, and I said, okay, Sarah Palin is no Hillary Clinton. I mean, personal opinion. She does not have a lot of experience. She does not have a lot of, I would argue, gravitas, a lot of wisdom to go with that experience. And part of this is because she just hasn't been on the national political scene. I don't really know how smart or stupid this woman is. What I have is what I see in interviews and the way she comes across in documentaries on CNN and PBS. So I thought, okay, the way she comes across is almost a diametric opposite of Hillary Clinton. She comes off as a strong, forceful woman, but she comes off as the very protective mother that is going to protect her brood until death do her part, or a moose gets her, depending on which comes first. Okay, so she comes across as a very upholder of American values, right? Family values and pro-heterosexual values, pro-gun values, and all of those things that we think of as conservative. Conservatives think of as family values. Now, setting aside whether or not you approve of those values, that's kind of the role she takes. It's more what we would consider, if you look at what heterosexuality means, more a traditionally female role than a male role. And Hillary Clinton, of course, is accused of being too masculine, right, in that duality. So I looked at the Sarah Palin cartoons, and I said, what do you find when you get there about the way she was portrayed? And I also started thinking, there's something else going on here. That whole idea of being a woman in that sense of being a mother and being subservient to men and doing what it is men think you should do, that can also be a tool for survival for women. If you are in a culture that says that is what you are supposed to do, that can be a way of surviving. It may not be what you want to do. That is literally come and get through the day or get into a professional workplace that will let you, at least in some respects, push your abilities a little bit further. Now, I understand these discourses are changing over time. Most of the women who are a good 25 years younger than I am in this audience are starting to be in a world where the discourse is changing, where you have a whole lot more opportunities than women my generation and the generation before me have had. But with Sarah Palin, I think we see some of the vestiges of this kind of traditional female paradigm of discourse existing. So what I did is I went to cable.com. That's one place where you can find political cartoons, and looked at what McCain categorizes as cartoons that say McCain chooses cable. Cartoons about McCain having chosen Sarah Palin as his vice presidential running mate. And then I went to politicalhumor.about.com and looked at cartoons from about the vice presidential debate. And what I did was I said, okay, what Charlotte Templin did was said she looked for different themes that come up in the way that Hillary Clinton was portrayed. So I tried to do the same thing without any preconception of what it was I was going to find. But understand that if you look for themes, you suspect that the small sample size I took, if they show up there, they might show up in the larger sample size. I have a total of 29 cartoons. And if you go to the larger universe of Sarah Palin cartoons, which is in hundreds, as far as I can gather, then you will probably see some of these themes come up. So what I'd first like to do is just give you a general rundown so we can look at on the technology. Okay?
Heather, can you speak up just a little?
Yeah, can't quite hear you back here either. Sorry. It's the room.
And hop on one foot for us, too, if you
I can do some flamenco for you if you'd like. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. For me, this is shouting, believe it or not. All right. The topics of the cartoons, in the cartoons about the vice presidential debate, broke down into 3 categories. One was low expectations. I i.e. the expectations for Sarah Palin were very low, and how did she do? Her performance in the debates, geared more specifically toward what it is she actually said or did in the debates. Third was portraying her as a lightweight, either in terms of experience or ability, as she either came to the debates or participated in the debates. The topics for the group cartoons called McCain Picks Palin included Palin's appeal to Hillary Clinton, Palin's conservative values. Those were the top two categories of cartoons. Then you have her qualifications, her physical appearance, which is when it got really, really interesting. And finally, McCain's judgment in choosing Palin. Some of them were more about McCain, his judgment, than they were about Sarah Palin. But they were put into this category nonetheless. So it's a total of about 29 cartoons. And I found some really interesting things in these pictures, and we'll go to the examples in just a minute. First of all, with regard to her physical appearance, almost without fail, she had big hair, big teeth, and red lips. Without fail, okay? She is, when her feet are shown, they're frequently shown in high heels. The phrase she used, the gloves are off and the high heels are on. At first I really like that phrase, but when you put it in her context, it means something different. So we'll set that aside. There is one cartoon I'm going to show you that actually talks about her measurements, i.e. her bust, waist, and hip measurements. She is, there are cartoons where her bust is emphasized and there's some kind of logo across her bust. Or there's one cartoon where the phrase community chest is used. And she's standing right next to it, kind of going like this and wondering a little bit, you know. There's another cartoon I'm not going to show you where she's it's like loose cannon, right? And her lips are pulled out like that, she kind of extended out, and the red lips on the end of it is a loose cannon. And then right on top of that is a microphone. So her lips are here, her mouth is here, the microphone's right here. So if you want to get phallic about that, you can do that too, okay? Like I said, I'm trying to open up the world so you can see it in a little bit different way. All right? So those were some of the characteristics of her physical appearance that you see. Now, with regard to her inexperience, the kinds of things that were used to portray her, the kinds of themes that were used, when I saw a lot of these cartoons originally, and I started laughing. And then I sat down and looked at this and I went, okay, maybe I shouldn't laugh. I'm not sure yet, but at least I said that to myself. First of all, she's portrayed as a beauty queen. She's been in beauty contests before, so you would expect her to be portrayed as a beauty queen, right? She frequently has a sash across her chest that says Vice President, a crown in her hair. She's holding a bouquet of flowers. She is seen as sash with Lucilla across it, Miss Lucilla, that kind of thing. So you get the beauty queen metaphor. There's also the Barbie doll theme that shows up in at least one of the cartoons I looked at. And this is where McCain is holding on to, I'm going to show you this, he's actually holding on to what looks like a Barbie doll, and it's Sarah Palin. Okay? She's also portrayed as having some kind of either baby child or infantile aspects to her in terms of her experience or ability. In one, she's shown riding a tricycle, I think this is going to come too, with her hair in pigtail, she's got a lollipop and a pacifier is holding that, right? And she's riding a tricycle, so she's a little girl on a tricycle. Another one is where it has to do with her preparing for the debate, and her debate podium, and two podia in the cartoon, and Joe Biden has a technician on his podium messing with the microphone. She's got somebody adjusting the training wheels on her podium. Okay? So again, that illusion of childlike or childish, well, she has a lot of growing up to do. Now, as I said, I perfectly think that this woman does not have the experience to be Vice President of the United States. But when you start portraying her as a child, I started questioning what it is I'm laughing at. Okay? Another category, again, this idea of her being a lightweight with regard to either her experience or her ability. Let's see. There's a cartoon where it's like a swimming pool, and it has transparent sides, and at one end you see the shallow end, you see Sarah Palin with the podium going down to the bottom of the shallow end, and then the other one you see Joe Biden standing there, and the podium goes down to the deep end. The obvious allusion being she is shallow and he is deep. Okay, so again, she's a lightweight compared to him. And there are a variety of other examples. The final category, which you may or may not want to put in the lightweight section, depending on your proclivities, has to do again with the low debate expectations. Cartoons showed her like jumping over the high bar setup in the Olympics. That's set maybe 6 inches off the ground, and then she jumps over it. Okay, so again, the idea of low expectations. So those are the general categories. What I'd like to do very briefly is show you, assuming I don't break the computer when I open it, some examples of this that I've been talking about. This is one of the ones that talks about expectations. Okay, can you all see this? All right, and as you can see, there's this low bar of debate expectations, and to be perfectly honest, the Republican Party did everything they could to lower those expectations. Okay, so this isn't just her being out there on her own. The people that she's running for are doing everything they can to create the best situation so that if she does survive, standing on one foot and not having to do anything else, then she succeeds. So she's celebrating, see, I did it, and all the while, and this is where the gender stuff starts coming in, all while being so gosh darn adorable. Aren't I cute? Right? Women are cute, or women that are in this discourse we're talking about are cute, right? And cute is something to patronize. It's, oh, here, dear, let me help you. Yes, come here, sweetheart, like a puppy or something. You have a cute puppy or a cute kitten, right? So this is one where you see both the issue of low expectations, that is, she's some kind of experiential or mental lightweight, and then again, where this idea of women not being strong and powerful, rather being adorable, comes in. So you look at her as an adorable person rather than someone who's capable of being vice president. Are there any questions about that? No? Okay. How am I doing on time? Okay, yeah, I'll be done soon. This is one of the, again, the debate expectations, the one I was telling you about, the technician putting the training wheels on the podium. And the little box here says training wheels, and he's messing with that. And then Joe Biden, again, the technician is adjusting the microphone. So that gives you, again, an idea of how she is being portrayed as childlike or childish or not being very sophisticated, not having a lot of gravitas. Now, if I have my bearings right, this is going to give us 2 cartoons. Yeah. The first one, this is the one with the Barbie doll. Have you heard the phrase caribou Barbie to describe Sarah Palin? One of my colleagues thinks that the phrase originated with Ariana Huffington or Daily Cause, one of the other liberal blogs, and it of course is meant to refer to her as a moose killing Barbie doll, right? If you will, caribou Barbie. She's out there in the Alaska wildlands hunting moose and caribou and protecting her young, if you will. Now this is a cartoon. It's a little bit complex, but it refers to both McCain's judgment and her lack of experience. It puts the two together. And as you see, there are 4 panels here. And McCain starts out by saying, my opponent lacks the experience to be commander-in-chief. And he's referring, of course, to Barack Obama, who has a few years in the Senate, 8 years or so as a state legislator. And then this is where the caricature comes in, unlike my choice for a running mate, Governor Palin of Alaska. And this is where he's holding the Barbie doll, okay? And she says, I was a runner-up for Miss Alaska, right? So again, you don't get any sense of gravitas. You don't get any sense of ability or qualification. The whole cartoon is about, and is supposed to be about, a satire on her ability. Then, again, you come down here, and it says, I hope all of you dejected Hillary gals that attempt to appeal to Hillary Clinton will take a look over here at my V. She's a gal, not a woman of commanding experience, not a serious contender for vice president of the United States, but a gal. Okay, and here you have Sarah Palin, chest. Again, her bust is emphasized, and it says pro-life. Okay. And then she has a sign, stop gaze, and then the NRA gun that says drill, 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 drill. Again, reflecting conservative values and the fact she's got the physical attributes of a woman. The cartoon is just picking up on this. And then you have some guy that looks like he's supposed to be Joe Sixpack, although he's got bottles rather than cans, but I guess you can get cans in a six-pack. If she can handle her 5 kids, she can handle running the country. Enough said. So being a mother is good enough. But the way this is portrayed, it doesn't give this guy a whole lot of credibility in making that judgment either. All he does is sit around in front of the TV and knock back the brewskis, right? So his judgment of the vice presidential running mate isn't being elevated either. So again, you put together McCain's judgment and the portrayal of Sarah Palin in there, and it does not come out very flattering. Any questions about that? No? You should try looking at 29 of these. Oh my God. And the last one I wanted to show you was actually this wasn't it, but what the hell, we'll talk about it anyway. This is, again, an appeal to the Hillary Clinton voters, and you have John McCain and Sarah Palin. She is portrayed, again, big hair, big teeth, big lips, and in this one there's almost this, she's a lot taller than John McCain, and she's kind of, reaching over. There's this kind of ominous look to her, if you can look at it that way for a second. Sort of taking over or bringing more emphasis to her on the ticket rather than John McCain, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you have Barack Obama and Joe Biden here saying at least it's not Hillary. So again, you have a put down of Hillary Clinton, okay, who of course fought heartily and well for the Democratic nomination, along with another woman who is coming up, and at least initially with her successful Republican speech at the Republican convention, energized and actually continues to energize the Republican base. So having shown you those very quick examples, and there are a lot of other examples that are great, in conclusion, I would just like to suggest, and again, following Wendy Brown's idea of let's look at the world in a slightly different way, just for a second, and look at maybe Sarah Palin in a slightly different way for just a second. If you put the beauty queen and the Barbie and the infant or the child and the lightweight, either from experience or mental ability, and the low debate expectations, they all combine to give you a picture of a candidate who is good-looking, not too bright, childish beauty queen who is way out of her depth. Okay, which may be reality, but this is how she is. This is how a woman who is a candidate for vice president is being portrayed. Okay, at least with these 20 cartoons. And again, I'm torn between this idea of satire is satire, and we're supposed to be able to laugh at ourselves, and I appreciate that. As I said, I laugh at these things. But when you start looking at it systematically, it gets a little bit disturbing about how she is being portrayed. And I start having sympathy for Sarah Palin and saying, maybe this is the only way she's managed to get through. Maybe this is what her culture expects of her, so this is what she indeed is doing. Instead of being the strong Hillary Clinton candidate, that's out there busting balls, she's out there protecting her brood and humanness. Maybe that's what she has to do in her life. Maybe that's what her life allowed her to do. So again, I would ask you to look at these things in a slightly different way when you laugh, when you critique, and say, am I engaging in a critique of someone that is no longer satire, but it crosses from satire into unnecessary put-down? At what point do you draw that line? And I will leave you to your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a great talk, and it segues quite nicely with what I'm going to be speaking about today. And I'm going to be speaking in sort of two very short acts. The first one is going to be sort of looking at race and gender in terms of winners and losers in the 2008 presidential political race. And then I'm going to go on more specifically to Proposition 4 and Proposition 8 on the California ballot, and talk a little bit about race and gender, how they relate to those two things. So very quickly, and I'll really be quick because of the wonderful talk that we just heard. I would say that the winners of race and gender as they relate to sort of November 2008 are likely going to be Obama and Palin. That Obama represents a kind of gentle and intellectual black masculinity that is appealing broadly in part because he so carefully manages himself. He's so intensely and attentive to the various ways in which blackness is represented within mainstream society, the cultural anxieties that white middle-class people have about African-American manhood in society, that he manages a kind of race transcendence. And I say a kind of race transcendence because there's some huge caveats to that. The promise of race transcendence, that is that we can transcend race either as an individual candidate or as a society, is something that gives us a kind of pass from history. It gives us the idea that by supporting or endorsing this very narrow tightrope that Obama has to walk in order to be a viable and widespread viable political candidate as a black man in America, that by supporting that, that somehow we have erased not just the structural accumulation of racialized power in our society and all the violences that that has created in the past, but also the many violences and exclusions that we have around race and gender, indeed, in our present. And so I am absolutely thrilled that we have the first African-American candidate from a major party running for president, likely to win. I think it's an amazing and historic moment. But I want to also mark the very narrow band of possibility that he is so skillfully and adeptly maneuvering in order to make himself a viable candidate. And just to mark that. The other side of that, then, I think, is Sarah Palin, who it's Rebecca Trastarian in Salon.com argued basically represents feminism without feminists. Well, what does that mean, feminism without feminists? Well, it means that all of the accomplishments and achievements toward gender equity, towards access to the political sphere, to the workplace, to opportunity, economic opportunity, even cultural opportunity within mainstream society comes only when coupled with a very conservative view of white femininity, as you've talked about, a kind of a fierceness, absolutely a fierceness, but it's still situated within this place of a kind of domestic sexpot subservience to authority and a representative place as the protector of home, hearth, and indeed heartland. And it's really interesting that this goes back to the question not just of femininity but of race. When we think about the ways in which Palin and McCain make these pilgrimages, for example, to Ground Zero in New York City to talk about the violences of 9/11 and how they are the true Americans because they continue to feel this sort of rupture of the soul because of that. On the other hand, talking about the media elite of New York City and how we need to distrust cosmopolitanism, and we need to talk about the real values of the real Americans, and those are not New York City people, right? Read racial diversity, cultural diversity, gender diversity. Those are the people who are in the real America, right? Places like Wasilla, Alaska, places like the Heartland. And so I think it's important to sort of recognize that. And so I want to then pull out sort of the two losers of politics, and to go along with your cartoon.
You have one.
I have the Hillary Clinton Nutcracker. And my dad sent me this last Christmas as a present and said, I'm sure you'll be able to use this in your gender studies classes. And I said, yes, I will. Thank you very much. But what this represents then is a kind of cosmopolitan female masculinity that is both laughable and threatening. And so while Palin is so easily satirized for the ways in which she sort of overrepresents femininity, Hillary Clinton represents a kind of female masculinity. Her relationship with Bill Clinton is obviously a kind of alternative domesticity where it's not really clear who exactly is in charge. It's not clear if it's monogamous. Well, it's clear it's not monogamous. It's not clear if it's based in love, right? Or is it based in some sort of mutual career and respect? And so she becomes a kind of figure of not womanhood that is easily satirized for the ways in which she represents a kind of masculine strength. So I will pass this around, but you can see that in the contrast to the images that you did, that she literally is not a Barbie doll. She's a nutcracker with, between her thighs, jagged edges that would seek to consume manhood entirely. So you can go ahead and pass that around and think about that. The alternative satirization that Obama has so skillfully made almost impossible would be, and I've asked my classes this since last November, what would be the alternative version of this toy or this cultural product for Obama? And as soon as I ask the question, people get really uncomfortable, right? What would that be? And as it turns out, the Chafee Committee Republican women recently from San Bernardino, California, came up with a model of it, and it was soundly rejected by everyone and represented as a point of horror. Does anyone know what that is? It kind of came and went from the news in like 2 seconds. Did anyone
The dollar bill?
register the $10 bill?
Yeah, the $10 bill with the...
Okay, so there was a $10 bill made that had him with huge buck teeth represented as a donkey. And then on the $10 bill, and it went out to their entire membership in San Bernardino, it had watermelon, ribs, Kool-Aid, and a KFC bucket of fried chicken on it. And the person who was in charge of the sending it out said that she had merely been trying to satirize Obama's own statement that he did not look like any other president that we had ever had. And everyone from the GOP statewide committee to, of course, everyone from Obama's camp said that this was an incredible violence against African Americans to do this kind of representation. But it's an attempt to do this meaning-making enterprise that you talked about, that Wendy Brown talks about, to reframe and recontrol the expansive reach of Obama's self-representation within these more traditional stereotypes of African Americans. And so the other loser then, I think, is McCain. And I think he's a loser for a couple of reasons in terms of representation. He never quite has been able to elevate himself out of cranky, old white manhood, where he seems as likely to sort of yell at you and tell you to get off his lawn, right, as to lead our country. And the ways in which he attempts to assert his patriarchal white male authority, which should be his to have in our society, right, in a society that does have some degree of white supremacy still embedded well within its power structure. His attempt to do that was to assail in the debates, for example, Obama's experience. But he wasn't able to do it in a way that Obama took the bait, and so Obama was never able to effectively sort of portray Obama as that anti-intellectual, impulsive, inexperienced stereotype that might be positioned for African American manhood. And so he seems like a kind of dinosaur almost of a different age for a lot of people. So I want to then go from that to more local discursive representations. And I'm so glad you brought this really wonderful explanation of discourse, because I didn't know how I was going to talk about it. But as a meaning-making enterprise that basically tries to package language and representation so that we all have supposedly a shared understanding of everyone's sort of order or place within the social order. And I want to talk about race and gender and Proposition 8 and Proposition 4. Proposition 8, for those of you that don't know, is the ballot initiative in California to have a constitutional amendment so that marriage will be defined as between a man and a woman. And so this obviously is in direct response to the California Supreme Court's legalization or ruling that you could not discriminate against same-sex couples in terms of marriage law in the state of California in June. And the only way to roll back, if you will, that legalization or that marriage equality for all people is to say, well, you might say that it's constitutional, but the only way that you decide as a court if something is constitutional or not is you go and you look it up on the Constitution, right? So it's sort of like, okay, well, let's go look at the reader's manual and decide what the rules are here, and then I'll tell you. So if we change the rule book to change it so that now the reader's manual says, oh, actually, marriage is only between a man and a woman in our founding document that is the basic way in which we determine who is fully human and who is not in our society, right? Then the decision itself no longer has any relevancy because now it is literally constitutional. So discourse isn't just about language and representation in terms of words, words, words. It's about the ways in which changing those words on a text, right? A text like that can profoundly alter the basic dignity and life of many human beings. So that's one thing. And then the other one is Proposition 4. And does anyone know what Proposition 4 is? Because I've been surprised by how few people actually do. Does anyone know what Prop 4 is? Yeah.
Is that the one about victims' rights? Or
No.
It's the proposition asking for 48 hours parental notice before a minor can abort a pregnancy.
That's right. So for those of you that didn't hear, it's about parental notification and a waiting period prior to a minor being able to have access to abortion procedures. And both of these are now Proposition 8, that is the banning of same-sex couples from their now asserted legal right to marriage, and the banning of the right of minor women to their self-determination around their own body regarding pregnancy. Right? These two things are likely to win. So just so you know, that's where we are right now in California. Both of those things are likely to win. And I will show my hand. I think that's horrible. I think that neither of these things should win. I think that we have discovered since June that indeed the sky has not fallen. Gays are not eating our babies now that we have same-sex marriage, right? What's actually happened is that people have been able to have the right to protect their partners during this economic downturn if their workplace allows them to extend benefits to their to their spouse, right? So they can have health care instead of no health care, right? They become part of the health insurance system as opposed to a burden to our emergency rooms, for example, right? It also means that they can protect their children within their families. And so I think that's a pretty good thing, right? I think that that's worth doing, and actually there doesn't seem to be much harm that comes from it. And as a gay man who is also a father, who is in a long-term relationship, I can say that I resent that I have to go get married during the marriage rush, right? Instead of treating my relationship with the dignity and honor that I think it deserves by giving it the time for us to decide to marry that is not under an artificial timeline. I find it really morally offensive, actually, that there is this scarcity that has been put upon our rights. And it's not the first time. In 2004, when we had marriage rights extended by Mayor Newsom in San Francisco, the reason you had those huge lines out front was not because people felt like they needed to be politically active, engaged, and say, take that, straight marriage, right? It was actually because there was this scarcity where they knew that rights once extended can often be taken away again. You don't just get rights and go on this great march of progress and there's more and more and more rights. Right? So how does that one relate to the questions of race and gender? Well, first of all, it relates in terms of the way in which we understand what is normal in our society. And there's a term within queer theory called heteronormativity that has merged out of queer theory called heteronormativity. And it's basically the assembling of society around the ideals of what would be sort of the best practices of heterosexuality and calling that normal. So taking what are the ideals as best practices of heterosexuality, monogamy, upper middle class, fidelity throughout a lifetime, children, productivity, patriotism, gender norms within that relationship, all of those things, and binding those things together and saying all of those ideals that very few people actually actualize are the norm. And then everyone should arrange their life as if that is the norm. And then what's happened alongside that in the last 10 to 15 years has been the emergence of a concept called homonormativity. And homonormativity is like heteronormativity, but for gay people. And so what it basically means is that in order for us to secure our rights in this increasingly precarious time when culturally and politically our rights are under attack, we need to look as much as possible like heteronormativity to get basic health care, right, to get the possibility of maybe even immigration rights, parental rights, employment protections, the right to serve in the military, and so on and so forth, right? The right to not be beaten on the street. I mean, it can be as basic as that, and so on and so forth. And what happens when we try to edge closer and closer to that approximation of the ideal and call it the norm for us as a community too, is it does this profound violence of exclusion to everyone else who isn't able to come as close to that ideal or doesn't want to, who has a fully livable life without it. And so that ends up impacting a lot of people from communities of color, from lower income brackets, from people from a wider range of the gender diversity spectrum, and people who simply don't want to or can't arrange their lives within a cohabitation framework of two people who are in a conjugal loving relationship for the rest of their life, right? Which is most of us. And so what's ended up happening, and I'll try to close up on this because I know we want to give time for questions. What ends up happening in terms of this, in terms of the way that no on Prop 8 has tried to represent itself, and I would argue part of why it's losing, is because we've tried to, the movement has tried to represent itself as only through the eyes of sensible heterosexuals. So you see white, rich parents of a lesbian daughter talking about how their lesbian daughter shouldn't be treated any different than their straight son, right? Or straight daughter, I can't remember which. And then you have these abstract appeals to fairness. Oh, well, you should be fair. Everyone should be fair. Isn't it important to be fair? Or you have these two women talking in a wealthy suburban kitchen about, don't you think that marriage should be extended to all? And then one's like, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And she's like, well, you don't want people to be discriminated against. And she goes, no, right? And that's the commercial. But you don't actually see a diversity of queer people who are trying to live their lives and who are going to be severely hurt if these rights are repealed, are pulled back. And so there's all sorts of people from all sorts of communities who say, why do these people get special rights when we're all struggling so hard in this economy, right? Why do they get those special rights? And that's been capitalized on by the Yes on 8 campaign, who says all that's going to happen is your kids are going to be forced to learn about king and king in the schools, and churches are going to lose their nonprofit status because they'll be forced to marry same-sex couples, both of which are totally, totally false, right? But broadly appealing. In terms of the other one then, in terms of Proposition 4 then, obviously there's profound implications in terms of gender when you assume that teenage girls cannot make autonomous decisions around their own bodies. But beyond that, it goes back to this heteronormative ideal. Why would you have parental consent if you would assume that there are, beyond the mom-dad in good communication with daughter relationships that have violence in them, the threat of violence, right? Parents who are not necessarily present in their children's lives, young girls who are trying to make their way as best they can throughout hard and difficult circumstances, making complex choices for themselves. Why would you want to limit those girls, those women's possibilities of a future, of a livable life based around the fact that you would hope that they live in the kind of family that is fully communicative and there would not be terrible repercussions for them both within their family and outside of it for having to tell their parents about the unfortunate outcome of a circumstance that they found themselves in. And the people who will be most impacted by that then, in terms of access to health care, in terms of access to opportunity, are going to be those people who are from low income and communities of color, as well as white girls and white women. So I just wanted to sort of signpost those things and the concerns that I have about them, and then to give sort of a hopeful message at the end, which is that we have the power to choose, not just in terms of this vote, which is a very constrained one around either not taking rights away or not taking rights away, right? Those are the two things that we're looking at in Prop 4 and Prop 8. But that we can think more expansively in this moment, right? The powers that be, the way that the world has been ordered and the way that we've been told that it's supposed to be ordered for the last 25 years is going to hell in a handbasket. Things are not working right now in our economy, right? In our foreign policy, in our domestic system, in our health care. It's time for new possibilities to emerge. And rather than responding from a place of fear and trying to make these ideals the norm, I urge us to think about the livable lives that people are living right now and how to expand the opportunities to make those lives more livable. What if we distribute rights and benefits to those who need them in household arrangements as they actually are? What if we extended them to single parents, to divorced families, to cohabitations of senior citizens who aren't in conjugal or loving relationships, to roommates and HIV/AIDS caretakers, to those who are in less lifetime-based models of conjugal or familial arrangement, but need to be together to share expenses during a certain period or time in their lives. Why don't we look at universal health care, which would solve many of these problems? The idea that we all have rights to our own bodies, and that our own social relations should be protected by a government that insists that capitalism work for us instead of us working for capitalism. So that's it.